It began with a cry. Not the kind that splits through violence, but softer, trembling, the cry of a baby caught in the cold wind of a dying town. Dust swept down Main Street like ghosts that had nowhere else to go. The saloon doors creaked against the evening wind, and every man inside turned for half a second before returning to his whiskey and cards. Only one man, a broad-shouldered cowboy with a scar across his jaw, looked twice. Elias Boone had seen his share of sorrow. He'd fought for land that never became his, buried a wife who died waiting for rain, and carried a silence that weighed more than his colt ever did. But when he heard that baby's cry, thin and lonely, something old inside him stirred. Outside, near the hitching post, a woman knelt on the dirt. Her dress was torn, her hair tangled with dust and blood. In her arms, a baby wrapped in a tattered shawl, trembling. Her face was streaked with tears and ash, and across her neck hung a small wooden sign burned with a word, whore. She wasn't from this town. You could tell by her accent, the pale grey of her dress, and the way she looked at people, not with shame, but with disbelief. Like she'd been thrown into a world that didn't know mercy. Elias holstered his gun. The men behind him laughed. "Ain't your fight, Boone?" someone muttered. He didn't answer. The woman clutched the baby closer. A few men stood on the porch, spitting tobacco and muttering names not fit for the child's ears. But she said nothing, only rocked the baby, whispering something that sounded like a prayer. Then Sheriff Dawes came out, boots polished, badge shining like it meant something. "You," he said, pointing at her. "We told you not to show your face again. You and that bastard." She didn't rise. She just looked up, eyes hollow yet fierce. "He needs milk," she whispered. "I'll leave after that." The sheriff kicked dust at her feet. "You'll leave now, or I'll see to it that you hang before sundown." That's when the cowboy stepped forward. Elias Boone didn't speak often. Men like him had learned that words didn't win fights. But when he did, folks listened. "She ain't hanging," he said, voice low as thunder. "Not tonight." The saloon went quiet. Cards froze mid-air. The sheriff's hand slid toward his holster. Elias didn't move, just stared at him, steady as the mountain wind. "You gonna stand for her?" the sheriff asked. Elias nodded once. "Someone has to." The woman's breath caught. For a heartbeat, hope flickered behind her eyes, faint but real. The sheriff spat and stepped back. "You're making a mistake, Boone." "Wouldn't be my first," Elias muttered. He took off his coat, wrapped it around the woman's shoulders, and lifted the baby. It was small, feverish, eyes closed tight against the wind. Elias's hands were rough, but gentle. For the first time in years, his heart beat not for vengeance or survival, but for something fragile. And in that dying light, as the saloon doors swung in silence, a whisper spread through town, that the gunman who once rode alone had just chosen to stand for a woman everyone else had already condemned. Outside, thunder rolled far off the desert hills. Somewhere, justice had stirred, quiet, slow, uncertain, but alive. Underscore 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 underscore. Every legend starts with a choice. Subscribe to hear the next. The fire cracked low that night, a weak, uncertain flame fighting the wind. Elias Boone sat across from the woman by the edge of town, near the dry riverbed where no one bothered to look. The baby slept wrapped in his coat. The woman hadn't spoken much since he'd brought them here, only murmured a name once, Clara. Her hands trembled as she tried to keep the small flame alive. "They burned my house," she said quietly, eyes fixed on the fire. "Said I'd cursed the water, that's why their wells ran dry." Elias looked up from where he sat, sharpening his knife absently. "You believe in curses, miss?" She shook her head. "I believe in men who need someone to blame." There was no self-pity in her tone, just the flat, resigned rhythm of someone who'd run out of tears. Her fingers brushed the small wooden sign she still wore around her neck. The word burned into it seemed to mock the firelight. Whore. Elias reached for it, but she flinched. "Don't," she whispered. "If I take it off, they'll just put it back." "Not while I'm here," he said. For the first time, she met his eyes. "Why?" she asked. "You don't know me." Elias thought about that for a long while. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was memory. Maybe he saw the shadow of his dead wife in her, the same quiet strength that the world mistook for weakness. Finally, he said, "Because I've seen too many good folks left to die alone." The wind carried their silence. Somewhere far off, a coyote called. The baby stirred, a soft whimper escaping its lips. Elias handed her the child and tossed another log into the fire. The sparks rose like lost prayers. Clara fed the baby, eyes glistening in the dim light. "They said my husband deserted," she murmured. "Said I must have driven him away. When the crops failed, the preacher said God was angry with our kind, women who speak out of turn." She gave a bitter smile. "So they branded me with words instead of iron." Elias's jaw tightened. "You were married." She nodded. "To a quiet man named Samuel. He went to work in the copper mines. Never came back. When I asked questions, they said I was a liar, then a curse." Her voice broke. "I tried to bury him proper, but they wouldn't even let me say his name." Elias turned toward the dark horizon. "Sounds like he was a good man." She smiled faintly. "He didn't believe in heaven. Said the earth was already hard enough." The cowboy stared into the fire and saw pieces of himself there. A soldier who once fought for a flag that forgot his name. A widower who had buried faith alongside his wife. And now, a woman before him who carried the same mark of exile, carved not by sin, but by small-town cruelty. He rose slowly, walked over, and unclasped the sign from her neck. "This belongs to them," he said. He tossed it into the flames. The wood hissed, and the letters burned to ash. Clara gasped. "You don't know what you've done." "Yeah," Elias said quietly. "I do." The firelight flickered against his face, half shadow, half mercy. In that moment, something shifted. A weight lifted, barely, but enough for Clara to breathe again. The baby sighed softly, its tiny hand curling around her finger. They sat like that until dawn, two lost souls watching shame turn to smoke. When the first light touched the horizon, Clara looked at him. "They'll come for me again," she whispered. Elias stood, tightening his belt and checking his rifle. "Then they'll have to go through me." The baby stirred, the sound small but alive, and for the first time in years, Elias Boone felt something that wasn't anger or emptiness. He felt purpose. The morning came slow and grey, the kind of dawn that felt ashamed to rise. Elias and Clara stood near the dried river, smoke from their small fire curling into the cold air. The baby's soft coos were the only sound that dared to live there. But peace in the west never stayed long. By midday, the dust clouds on the horizon told him what was coming. Riders. 4, maybe 5. The sheriff always came with company. Clara tightened her shawl. "They found us." Elias didn't answer. He knelt, checked the chamber of his rifle, and adjusted his hat low against the sun. His hands were steady, but his eyes, those eyes looked tired of killing. "They won't leave until they see a body," he said. "Mine?" she asked softly. He looked up. "Or mine?" The riders drew closer, the same men from the saloon. Their laughter carried on the wind, rough and certain. Sheriff Dawes rode ahead, chin high, his badge catching the light like false truth. When they reached the ridge, the sheriff called out, "You think you can play savior, Boone? She fooled you. She fooled every man that ever looked her way." Elias stood tall beside Clara. "She didn't fool me," he said. "But you did. All of you. With your sermons and your gallows talk." The sheriff sneered. "She's cursed, Boone. Water turned black the day she came here." Elias spat into the dirt. "Water turns black when men poison it, not women." The sheriff's hand went to his gun, but Elias was faster, not with a draw, but with a stare that stopped the man cold. "You pull that iron," Elias said, "and I promise, I'll show you what judgment really looks like." Behind doors, the men shifted uneasily. None of them wanted to die for righteousness they didn't believe in. Then something broke the tension, a sound. A small, clear voice from behind the sheriff's horse. A boy, no more than 10, had followed the riders. The preacher's son. His small hand pointed toward Clara. Mama said she gave me bread when no one else would, he said. She ain't evil. The sheriff turned red, words stuck behind his teeth. The other men looked down. One muttered, "He ain't wrong." It was the first crack in the silence. A small voice against a wall of hate, but enough. Clara's eyes filled with tears. Elias glanced at her, then at the boy, then back at the sheriff. "You hear that?" Elias said quietly, "Out of the mouth of a child comes the truth." The sheriff dismounted, his face dark. "You'll regret this, Boone." Elias didn't move. "I already regret enough." The riders turned away, one by one, the mob dissolving like a bad dream. Dawes lingered, spitting in the dirt before leaving. As the dust settled, Elias felt the weight of the moment. Not victory, not peace, but a pause. He looked down at Clara. Her hands trembled. The sign was gone, the child was alive, and the world, for one fragile moment, had chosen mercy. Elias knelt beside the fire pit and pressed his palm into the warm ash where her wooden shame had burned. "Don't let them write your story, Clara," he said. "You get to do that now." She nodded, voice soft as wind. "With what?" "With what's left," he said. The baby stirred and cried, the sound pure and piercing. Elias smiled faintly. "Guess that's as good a start as any." They walked together down the riverbed, into the open land beyond the ridge, where no one yet knew their names, and the dust didn't whisper lies. But behind them, Sheriff Dawes was not done. He watched from the hill, eyes cold, hand on his revolver. "You can run," he muttered. "But this land remembers everything." And as night fell again, the west held its breath, waiting for the next dawn, the next reckoning. The desert stretched endless, a sea of dust and bones under a merciless sun. Elias rode ahead, hat pulled low, Clara behind him with the baby wrapped against her chest. The horse's breath came heavy, the wind carried sand like tiny knives. They'd been riding for hours, chasing a horizon that didn't want to be caught. Every mile took them further from the town, and closer to nowhere. Clara broke the silence. "He won't stop." Elias didn't turn. "Sheriff Dawes." She nodded. "No," he said quietly. "Men like him never stop. They just run out of bullets or excuses." The baby whimpered. Clara adjusted her shawl, her arms trembling with exhaustion. Elias slowed the horse near a cluster of rocks, a dry arroyo with enough shade for a rest. He helped her down gently. His hands brushed hers, calloused meeting trembling, and she froze for a moment, then nodded her thanks. As the baby nursed, Elias took to gathering dead brush. The silence between them wasn't heavy now. It was companionable, the kind that comes from shared danger. When the fire crackled, Clara spoke again. "You don't ask much." Elias looked up. "Figure you'll tell what you want told." She hesitated, then said, "The man I called husband, Samuel, he didn't die in the mines." Elias frowned. "Then where?" Her eyes glistened with the firelight. "He was killed by Sheriff Dawes. Shot him when he found out Samuel planned to expose the railroad deal, the one that stole half the town's land." Elias's knife paused mid-whittle. "And they blamed you?" She nodded. "Said I'd cursed the sheriff's house. Said Samuel's death was the Lord's punishment for my sin." Her voice trembled. "They buried him without a marker. I tried to speak. They tied me to a post and branded my name in wood instead of stone." Elias stared into the flames, jaw tight. He could almost hear the sheriff's laughter echo in his skull, that arrogant drawl, that smug righteousness. "You ever held a gun?" he asked suddenly. Clara blinked. "No," he handed her his Colt. "You'll learn." She shook her head. "I don't want to kill him." Elias looked at her, really looked at her. "Then don't," he said. "But if he comes for that child, you better not miss." The sun dipped low, bleeding gold across the rocks. The air grew colder, sharper. Elias cleaned his rifle, his movements slow and steady, ritual-like, the way soldiers pray. Then, a sound, faint at first, then clear, hooves. He froze. "They found us." Clara gathered the baby close. Elias moved fast, dousing the fire and motioning her behind the rocks. He crouched low, rifle aimed toward the ridge. The sheriff's silhouette appeared first, for men behind him, rifles glinting in the dying light. Dawes shouted, "You think you can hide in my desert, Boone? This land belongs to me." Elias didn't answer. He waited until the men drew closer, then fired once. The echo ripped across the valley. One of Dawes's men fell from his horse. The others scattered for cover, bullets whizzing through the dusk. Clara held the baby tight, whispering prayers under her breath. Elias reloaded, fired again, gritting his teeth as a bullet grazed his arm. The smell of gunpowder filled the air, sharp and bitter. Dust rose around them like smoke from some cruel altar. Then, silence. Only the wind and the baby's frightened cry. When it cleared, the sheriff was gone. The others had fled. Elias slumped against the rock, blood trickling down his sleeve. Clara crawled to him, pressing her hand to the wound. "You're hurt." He winced but smiled faintly. "Ain't dead yet." She tore a strip from her dress and wrapped his arm, her fingers trembling. "Why do you keep helping me?" He looked at her, voice raw. "Because someone once helped me when I didn't deserve it. Figured I'd return the favor before I die." The desert wind moaned low, like it carried the memory of the fallen. Clara leaned close, whispering, "You won't die, Elias." He met her gaze. "No," he murmured. "But he will." He looked out toward the ridge where the sheriff's shadow had vanished, and in the deepening night, vengeance took root. Not the loud kind. The quiet kind that waits. And for the first time, Clara didn't feel like prey. She felt like witness to something older than hate, older than shame. The desert cooled. The stars burned above them, cold and distant, watching two souls who refused to be buried by the world. The desert wind carried the scent of gunpowder and rain, two things that never lasted long in the West. Elias's wound had healed enough for him to move, though every lift of his rifle drew a hiss through his teeth. Clara walked beside him, the baby strapped close against her chest, eyes watchful beneath her bonnet. They were heading east, toward the old copper valley, where she said Samuel's bones still lay under the dust. "I just want to mark his grave," she whispered. Elias nodded. "Then we'll mark it." The world was quiet except for the horses' hooves and the soft clink of Elias's spurs. The kind of quiet that comes before something breaks. They reached the valley at dusk. The light slanted red across the rocks, the air thick with memory. Clara knelt in the dirt and began to dig with her hands. Not deep, just enough to lay down a small wooden cross she'd carved on the way. Elias stood watch. Every sound made his finger twitch toward his holster. And then it came, a single echo, sharp and distant. A rifle crack. Elias spun, pulling Clara down behind the rocks. The bullet struck where she'd been kneeling, shattering the cross in half. Dust flew into the fading light. The sheriff's voice rolled across the canyon. "You think you can bury the past, Boone? It buries you first." Elias cursed under his breath. "Stay down," he told her. He crawled forward, eyes narrow, spotting the flicker of movement on the ridge, Dawes and two of his men. "You killed her husband," Elias shouted. "You lied to your town. And you branded her for your sin." Dawes's laughter echoed back, dry as the stones. "Ain't no sin in keeping order." Another shot rang out. It hit the rock beside Elias's head, spraying shards against his cheek. Blood trickled down, warm and real. He exhaled, aimed once, and fired. One of the sheriff's men dropped, the other scrambled behind cover. The silence that followed was heavier than the thunder. Then, the sheriff's horse screamed and bucked. Clara's baby began to cry, sharp and frightened. Elias whispered, "Good girl, hold him close." He moved low, circling the ridge. His boots slid on loose gravel, his breath came harsh. The air smelled of rust and dry sage. He found Dawes reloading behind a rock, the badge on his chest glinting in the dying sun. Elias stepped forward, rifle raised. "Drop it." Dawes turned, eyes wild. "You'd shoot a lawman." Elias's voice was steady. "You ain't been the law for a long time." For a moment, neither moved. The desert wind howled between them. Then, a single shot. Dust rose. A hawk cried overhead. When it cleared, the sheriff's pistol lay smoking in the dirt, and Elias stood over him, rifle lowered. Dawes gasped, clutching his shoulder. "You think she'll thank you? You think she's clean?" Elias looked down. She doesn't have to be clean. She just has to live. He turned to Clara, who stood now at the edge of the ridge, the baby quiet against her heart. Her eyes met his, not with fear, but calm. "Let's go," he said softly. But she didn't move. She knelt by the broken wooden cross, gathered the two halves, and tied them together with the strip from Elias's old bandage. Then she placed it in the ground again, not for Samuel, but for every name they'd tried to erase. Elias watched her, hat in hand. "World's gonna forget," he said quietly. "Then I'll remind it," she replied. They rode at dawn, leaving the sheriff alive but broken, his badge buried in the dust behind them. Weeks later, in a green valley beyond the range, Clara built a small cabin near the water. She planted wildflowers over Samuel's cross and placed another beside it, unmarked. For Elias. Not dead, just gone. Some nights, folks in nearby towns said they saw a campfire flicker on the far ridge, a man sitting quiet, watching over a mother and her child. They said he never stayed long, only until the coyotes stopped howling. And when the baby learned to walk, Clara told him stories. About a man who once put down his gun and picked up hope. About a world that tried to break them, and the quiet mercy that stitched them back together. The valley wind whispered through the flowers, carrying the sound of a single, distant gunshot, fading, finally, into peace. Sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is refuse to let hate finish the story. Every scar hides a story worth hearing. Subscribe for more campfire tales.